The birth of Islam stands as one of history's most consequential moments, a 7th century revelation that would transform the world forever. For nearly 1.8 million Muslims today, the traditional story is sacred. The Prophet Muhammad, an unlettered merchant from Mecca, received divine revelations through the angel Gabriel, launching a pure monotheistic faith that restored Abraham's original religion. But what if this narrative developed centuries after the events it describes, tells only part of the story? The past 50 years have witnessed a revolution in Islamic studies. Archaeologists digging in the Arabian sands, epigraphers deciphering ancient inscriptions, and historians sifting through non-Muslim accounts have pieced together a far more complex picture. They've discovered a 7th century world bubbling with religious ferment, where prophetic movements competed for followers, where Jewish, Christian, and Zoroastrian ideas flowed freely, and where the lines between religions remain remarkably fluid. This isn't simply an academic debate. Understanding Islam's origins means understanding the foundations of a global civilization that has shaped art, science, philosophy, and politics for 14 centuries. In this video, we'll reveal shocking truths that challenge everything you thought you knew about Islam's beginnings. Discover how supposedly original Islamic stories were adapted from older Jewish, Christian, and Persian myths, sometimes nearly word for word. We'll show you the exact parallels between Quranic passages and earlier texts that traditional accounts never mention. Uncover the forgotten story of Muhammad's rivals, other prophets who competed for followers in the 7th century Arabia. What if history had gone differently? We'll introduce you to Musaylima, whose movement nearly defeated early Islam, and Sajjah, the female prophetess who raised armies and challenged male religious authority. Explore ancient inscriptions proving monotheism dominated Arabia centuries before Muhammad, evidence that transforms our understanding of Islam's environment. Witness how miraculous stories surrounding Islam's founder emerged suspiciously late, often mirroring legends told about earlier religious figures. And perhaps most provocatively, we'll reveal how the distinct religion we now call Islam may have evolved gradually over a century, not in isolated Arabian deserts, but through complex interactions with the empires, beliefs, and cultures of the late antique world. This isn't just an academic debate. It's a journey that illuminates one of history's most consequential religious movements in an entirely new light. What you're about to see will forever change how you understand not just Islam, but how religions are born, evolve, and transform the world. The Arabia of the 6th and 7th centuries was not the isolated pagan wasteland often portrayed in traditional accounts. Rather, it sat at the crossroads of empires and ideas. To the northwest lay the Christian Byzantine Empire, heir to Rome and defender of Orthodox Christianity. To the northeast stood the Zoroastrian Persian Sasanian Empire, with its cosmic dualism of good versus evil. Between these superpowers, Arabia served as both buffer zone and commercial highway, a peninsula crisscrossed by trade routes carrying not just goods, but beliefs. Christianity had established deep roots in the region. The city of Najran in southern Arabia housed a significant Christian community. The Ghassanid Arabs served as Byzantine allies and were ardent Christians. In the east, the Lakhmid kingdom maintained ties with Nestorian Christians, those who emphasized Jesus' human nature over his divinity, having been declared heretical by the Byzantine Church. Judaism too had gained a firm foothold, particularly in the oasis communities of Yathrib, later Medina, Khaybar, and Tema. Some Arab tribes had even converted entirely to Judaism. Archaeological evidence from northwestern Arabia reveals Jewish communities with synagogues dating back to the 3rd century CE. Perhaps most intriguing are the Hanifs, Arab monotheist who rejected both Christianity and Judaism while worshiping the God of Abraham. Traditional Islamic sources acknowledge these figures, like Waraka ibn Nawfal, a cousin of Muhammad's first wife, Khadijah, who is said to have recognized Muhammad's prophetic calling. Contrary to the standard narrative of Muhammad bringing monotheism to polytheistic Arabs, epigraphic evidence tells a completely different story. Inscriptions from across the peninsula suggest that monotheism had already become widespread by the 3rd century CE. Dr. Ilka Lindstedt's analysis of pre-Islamic inscriptions shows a striking prevalence of monotheistic formulations centuries before Muhammad. The overwhelming evidence points to monotheism being the primary belief in Arabia from the 3rd century onward, Lindstedt writes. The inscriptions repeatedly invoke a single high god, often using the term Allah, the God, which would later become Allah in Islamic usage. What these inscriptions reveal is not a sharp break between paganism and Islam, but rather a gradual evolution where Arabia's religious identity was already shifting toward monotheism long before Muhammad's birth. This was also an era of apocalyptic expectation. Byzantine-Persian wars, plagues, and social upheavals fueled beliefs that the end times were near. Many communities awaited a messiah or final prophet. In the decades just before Islam, both Jewish and Christian texts prophesied the coming of new leaders. According to a 7th century Armenian chronicle by Sabaeus, Arab tribes identified as Ishmael's descendants joined with Jews in hopes of restoring the Holy Land, a coalition led by a figure claiming to fulfill God's promises. It was into this bubbling cauldron of religious ideas, not a spiritual vacuum, that Islam would emerge. According to Islamic tradition, Islam began in 610 CE when Muhammad, a respected Meccan merchant, received his first revelation while meditating in a cave outside the city. Over 22 years, the angel Gabriel delivered God's final message, which Muhammad himself, unable to read or write, memorized and recited to his followers. Facing persecution from Mecca's polytheistic elite, Muhammad and his growing community fled to Medina in 622 CE, the Hijra, which marks year 1 of the Islamic calendar. There, he established the first Islamic state, eventually conquering Mecca and cleansing the Kaaba of idols. By his death in 632 CE, much of Arabia had embraced Islam. The Quran, Muslims believe, was preserved by Muhammad's companions, first orally and in scattered written form, then compiled into an authoritative text under the 3rd Caliph, Uthman, around 650 CE. This standard narrative portrays Islam's rise as a clean break with paganism, a religion born fully formed via divine revelation. Modern historians, however, applying critical methods to the earliest available evidence, paint a substantially different picture. Several key problems complicate the traditional account. First, the earliest detailed biographies of Muhammad by Ibn Ishaq and others were written 100 to 200 years after his death, roughly equivalent to someone today writing the first detailed account of the American Revolution without prior sources. Second, almost no contemporary non-Muslim accounts describe Muhammad's career in Mecca and Medina. Third, archaeological evidence from 7th century Arabia is sparse, particularly from Mecca itself. Revisionist scholars like John Winsbrough, Patricia Crone, and Michael Cook have used this evidentiary gap to propose alternative theories about Islam's emergence. Some of their claims are extreme, but others have gained wider acceptance among historians. Among the most compelling revisions is what historian Fred Donner calls the Believers Movement thesis. Donner argues that Muhammad's followers initially saw themselves not as members of a new religion called Islam, but as a community of believers, mu'minun, devoted to strict monotheism. The early community was ecumenical, Donner writes, open to Jews and Christians who affirmed one God and lived righteously. The Quran itself addresses its audience mainly as believers and even refers to righteous Jews and Christians by this term in Quran 3:199. Only gradually toward the late 7th century did a distinct Muslim identity crystallize, evidenced by the shift in language on coins and inscriptions. Another significant revision concerns geography. Many scholars question whether Mecca was truly Islam's birthplace. The Quran's description of agriculture, fields of grain, vineyards, olive trees, don't match Mecca's barren environment. Historian researcher Dan Gibson's controversial Petra hypotheses suggest early Islam centered further north, closer to Jewish and Christian influences. While this specific theory remains contentious, it highlights the scarcity of archaeological evidence for Mecca's prominence in the early 7th century. Perhaps most intriguing is the theory that Islam emerged within rather than against the Judeo-Christian tradition. Some scholars argue that the Quran's audience, the polytheist or mushrikun it condemns, were not idol worshippers, but rather heterodox Christians who associated partners with God through the doctrine of the Trinity. The Quran's intense focus on rejecting divine sonship or partnership suggests an intra-monotheistic debate. In their groundbreaking work, Hagarism, Patricia Crone and Michael Cook proposed that the earliest Muslims initially aligned with Jews in a Hagarine alliance, venerating the biblical patriarchs. According to this theory, Islam began as a messianic reformist sect within Abrahamic tradition, only later developing its distinct identity. Early non-Muslim sources lend some credence to this view. They often call the Arab conquerors Hagarines, children of Hagar, or Ishmaelites, and describe them observing Jewish-like practices. The earliest archaeological evidence of Islam, the Dome of the Rock in Jerusalem, built in 691 CE, contains the first known inscriptions of Islamic Shahada, that's a declaration of faith, and verses denying Christ's divinity. This suggests that by the time 60 years after Muhammad's death, Islamic identity was crystallizing in opposition to Christianity. Likewise, coins minted by the early caliphate initially imitated Byzantine and Persian designs, sometimes even depicting the cross or Zoroastrian fire altars, before gradually adopting distinctly Islamic symbolism. This pattern supports the idea that Islam, as a unique religious civilization, consolidated gradually, turning an Arab empire into an Islamic empire over decades rather than emerging fully formed. The Quran stands as Islam's miracle, a text Muslims believe was revealed word for word to Muhammad. The traditional accounts state that the Quran was collected shortly after Muhammad's death and standardized under Caliph Uthman around 650. Modern scholarship both supports and complicates this picture. The remarkable consistency of early Quranic manuscripts, like the famous Birmingham fragments, radiocarbon dated to the late 6th or even early 7th century, suggests the text stabilized relatively early. This contradicts those extreme revisionist claims that the Quran was fabricated much, much later. However, evidence also indicates the text underwent editing and interpretation during compilation. The Quran is arranged thematically, not chronologically, with later Islamic scholars themselves noting verses that appear to have been abrogated or recontextualized between the Meccan and Medinan periods. When we examine the Quran's content closely, its engagement with earlier traditions becomes unmistakable. Far from appearing in a vacuum, many Quranic passages presuppose their audience's familiarity with biblical stories. They often don't narrate these tales from scratch, but allude to them midstream as though commenting on known material. One of the most striking theories comes from the scholar Christoph Luxemburg, a pseudonym, who proposes that many obscure Quranic passages make sense when read as Syro-Aramaic rather than pure Arabic. According to the controversial Luxemburg thesis, parts of the Quran derived from Syriac Christian liturgical texts, written in an Arabic dialect heavily influenced by Syriac vocabulary. Luxembourg's most famous example concerns the Houris, promised to the righteous in paradise, traditionally translated as dark-eyed virgins. He argues the word hur in Quran 56:22 actually refers to white grapes, a symbol of heavenly bliss in Syrian Christian hymns. While this particular claim remains highly disputed, linguistic analysis does confirm that numerous Quranic terms like sirat, I believe that's how you pronounce it, path, or furqan, I'm probably butchering these, criterion, and Injil, gospel, are loan words from Aramaic. Then there's the discovery of the Sana'a palimpsest in Yemen, Quranic parchments with variant verses beneath a later rewritten text, provides physical evidence that the text was not absolutely fixed in the first decades. The differences are mostly minor phrasing changes or verse order swaps, but they indicate some degree of revision occurred. This textual fluidity aligns with the revisionist suggestion that early caliphs or scholars standardized the Quran, possibly under Abd al-Malik in 685 to 705 CE, whose reign saw the first widespread appearance of distinctly Quranic phrases on coins and inscriptions. The Quran self-consciously positions itself within the biblical tradition, frequently referencing figures like Adam, Noah, Abraham, Moses, David, and Solomon. Yet the specific forms these stories take often reflect not the Bible itself, but post-biblical Jewish commentaries and legends, what Muslims later termed Isra'iliyat, stories of the Israelites. Consider the Quranic verse of Cain and Abel's story. The Bible, Genesis 4, relates how Cain killed Abel, but gives few details. The Quran 5:27-31 adds a dramatic scene after the murder. Then Allah sent a raven, scratching the ground to show him how to hide the corpse of his brother. This vignette of a bird teaching burial is absent from the Bible, but appears in Jewish Midrash Tanhuma, where two birds, one killing the other and digging a grave, inspire Cain's actions. Another famous example is the Quranic maxim, "Whoever kills a soul, it is as if he had slain all mankind, and whoever saves a soul, it is as if he saved all mankind." Quran 5:32. This striking phrasing directly parallels a saying in the Mishnah, Sanhedrin 4:5, a Jewish legal text compiled around the 3rd century. "Whoever destroys a single life, it is as if he destroyed the whole world, and whoever saves a single life, it is as if he saved the whole world." The Quran's portrayal of Abraham contains elements absent from the Bible, but found in later Jewish legend. In Surah 21:50-7, Abraham confronts his father's idol worship, breaks the idols, and is thrown into a fire, only to be miraculously saved by God's intervention. The Bible mentions none of this, but Midrash Genesis Rabbah describes young Abraham breaking his father's idols and being cast into a fiery furnace by King Nimrod, from which God delivers him. Even the Quranic account of the golden calf during the Exodus includes the detail that the idol lowed like a cow, Quran 7:148, a feature found in rabbinic commentary imagining the calf miraculously making sounds. The Quran enters into conversation with earlier texts, selectively affirming some elements while revising others to align with its strict monotheistic message. The Quran's engagement with Christianity is complex and fascinating. Jesus, Isa, and his mother Mary, Maryam, feature prominently. Maryam has an entire chapter named after her, more recognition than she receives in the New Testament. The Quranic portrayal of Jesus aligns with the Eastern Christian perspective. He is a miracle-working prophet and Messiah, born of a virgin, but emphatically not divine. Do not say Trinity, God is only one God, admonishes Quran 4:171. This high regard for Jesus, coupled with rejection of his divinity, mirrors beliefs of certain Jewish Christian sects, like the Ebionites, who saw Jesus as a righteous prophet, not God incarnate. What's particularly striking is the Quran's use of apocryphal Christian stories absent from the canonical Gospels. The Quran describes Mary giving birth beneath a palm tree that miraculously provides dates and fresh water, Quran 19:22-26. This scene doesn't appear in the New Testament, but features in Christian apocrypha, like the Proto-Gospel of James and the Gospel of Pseudo-Matthew. Similarly, the Quran has the infant Jesus speaking from the cradle to defend his mother's honor, Quran 19:29-33, and later creating birds from clay that come to life when he breathes on them, Quran 3:49 and Quran 5:110. Both miracles appear in the infancy Gospel of Thomas, but not in the canonical text of Scripture. Perhaps most theologically significant is the Quran's stance on Jesus' crucifixion. They did not kill him, nor did they crucify him, but it was made to appear so to them, Quran 4:157. This denial of the crucifixion, as many have interpreted it this way, Christianity's central event, aligns with certain Gnostic doctrines. The 2nd century Gnostic teacher, Basilides, taught that Simon of Cyrene was substituted for Jesus on the cross, while Jesus escaped. A belief echoed in apocryphal texts like the Second Treatise of the Great Seth. These parallels suggest that the ideas reaching the Arabian Peninsula came not just from mainstream Byzantine Christianity, but from heterodox traditions circulating in Syria and Egypt. Islamic tradition itself acknowledges potential Christian influences through figures like Waraka ibn Nafal, a learned cousin of Muhammad's wife Khadijah, said to have been familiar with Christian scriptures, and Bahira, a monk who allegedly recognized the young Muhammad as a future prophet. The very structure of certain Quranic passages resembles Syriac Christian hymns and homilies. The light verse, Quran 24:35, Allah is the light of the heavens and the earth, bears similarities to Syriac descriptions of God as light, while Surah 112, say, He is God, one, reads almost like a direct response to the Nicene Creed, using similar rhythmic patterns while asserting strict monotheism. In essence, Islam's initial engagement with Christianity was selective, embracing Jesus' miracles, virgin birth, and prophethood, while firmly rejecting any hint of divine incarnation or Trinitarian theology. The Quran positions itself as restoring Jesus' true message against what it regards as later corruptions. Beyond the biblical sphere, Persian and Mesopotamian religious concepts significantly shaped early Islam. The Arabian Peninsula had long interacted with the Persian Empire, and after the Islamic conquest of Iran in the 640 CE, many Zoroastrians became part of the emerging Muslim community. Islamic eschatology, end times doctrine, shows striking parallels with Zoroastrian beliefs. Zoroastrianism taught that souls cross a razor-thin bridge, Chinvat Bridge, over hell, face a final resurrection of bodies, and receive eternal rewards or punishments. Islam describes a similar bridge of Sirat that all must cross, with the wicked falling into hellfire below. Even the Quranic imagery of paradise, Jannah, as a lush garden with flowing waters, echoes the Persian concept of parideza, walled garden. The word paradise itself entered Semitic languages from Old Persian paradeza. The Quran's angelology also suggests Persian influence. While Islam is strictly monotheistic, with no equal divine power, the figure of Iblis, Satan, as a rebellious creature who leads humanity astray, invites comparison to the Zoroastrian evil spirit, Ahriman, a curious Quranic story about the angels Harut and Marut, Quran 2:102, who fell into error while teaching magic in Babylon, combines Jewish and Persian elements. Some scholars believe the names Harut and Marut derive from Harvatat and Amurtat, Zoroastrian angelic beings. Islamic practices may also reflect Persian influence. The 5 daily prayers in Islam parallel the Zoroastrian practice of praying 5 times daily at defined periods. Ritual purity laws concerning washing, menstruation, and impurity have rough counterparts in Zoroastrian purity codes. While such practices exist in many religions, the intensity of purity concerns in early Islam might have been reinforced by Persian attitudes, especially as many Zoroastrian priests and converts became part of Islamic scholarly class very early on. Reaching further back, we find echoes of ancient Mesopotamian myths. The Quranic flood narrative ultimately derives from the biblical account, but both build upon the much older epic of Gilgamesh. The concept of the primordial garden, Eden, Jannah, with trees of life or knowledge appears in Sumerian and Babylonian myths long before the Bible or Quran. The Quran also preserves uniquely Arabian legends like the vanished civilizations of Ad and Thamud, presented as examples of God's wrath on the arrogant. These likely stem from local Arabian memory of ancient ruins or tribes, incorporated into the Quranic framework as moral parables, similar to how biblical tales of Sodom functioned. This pattern of cultural adaptation continues in post-Quranic Islamic tradition. The Prophet's famous night journey, Isra and Maraj, though not detailed in the Quran, bears similarities to Zoroastrian texts like the Arda Viraf Nama, where a priest travels through cosmic realms guided by an angel. The Islamic version localizes this genre of celestial ascent common across the region, with Jerusalem as the stepping stone. Such cross-cultural fertilization doesn't diminish Islam's distinctiveness, but illustrates just how new religions naturally incorporate and transform elements from their environment. Persian, Mesopotamian, and Arabian cultural motifs were woven into Islam's fabric, even as it maintained its core commitment to strict monotheism and prophetic revelation. However, one of the most overlooked aspects of Islam's origins is that Muhammad was not the only claimant to prophethood in 7th century Arabia. The Islamic tradition itself records several contemporaries who proclaimed divine missions either during Muhammad's lifetime or shortly after his death. This proliferation of prophetic figures reveals a landscape charged with religious expectation, where charismatic leadership combined with claims of revelation was a pattern of the time. Much like how multiple messianic claimants arose in the 1st century Judea, Musaylima, nicknamed the Liar in Islamic sources, emerged from the Banu Hanifa tribe in Central Arabia. During Muhammad's lifetime, he proclaimed himself a prophet and even wrote to Muhammad suggesting they share authority. He attracted a substantial following by preaching in a poetic, Quran-like style. Islamic sources preserve fragments of his alleged revelations, verses about frogs and promises of prosperity that read as simplistic echoes of Quranic rhetoric. After Muhammad's death, Musaylima became the focus of the Ridda, apostasy wars. The first caliph, Abu Bakr, dispatched forces that defeated and killed him at the Battle of Yamama in 633 CE. The threat Musaylima posed was serious. His tribe was powerful, and until his defeat, the new Medinan state's dominance over Arabia remained uncertain. Even more fascinating was Sajah bint al-Harith, a female prophetess from the Banu Tamim tribe. Born into a Christian family, Sajah raised an army around the time of Muhammad's death, claiming divine authority. She temporarily allied with Musaylima, even marrying him according to some accounts, in a joint opposition to Medina's rule. Her movement eventually dispersed, and she reportedly later accepted Islam. Tulayha ibn Khuwaylid, of the Banu Asad tribe, similarly declared prophethood and fought Muslim forces. After his defeat, he pragmatically submitted to Islam and later fought alongside Muslim armies, illustrating how former rivals were integrated into the expanding Islamic community. In Yemen, Al-Aswad al-Ansi proclaimed himself the veiled prophet, performing alleged miracles and gathering followers just before Muhammad's death. Islamic sources claim he was assassinated by his own people before Muslim armies arrived. The existence of these parallel prophetic movements likely influenced Islam's self-definition. The Quran's declaration that Muhammad is the seal of the prophets in Quran 33:40, meaning no prophet would come after him, may have gained urgency precisely to undercut figures like Musaylima or future claimants. This competitive religious atmosphere humanizes Muhammad's mission. Rather than standing alone as a singular divine messenger, he emerges as the most successful among several charismatic leaders vying for religious authority in a period of spiritual ferment. His movement outcompeted rivals through a combination of compelling message, strategic allegiance building, and ultimately military victory. Early Islamic sources themselves hint at Muhammad's deeply human struggles and his limitations. The Quran references his periods of doubt and the opposition he faced. Traditions acknowledge moments of uncertainty, like his initial fear upon receiving revelations, or his grief at the death of his son. These touches of humanity make his achievements all the more remarkable, not as supernatural miracles, but as the work of an extraordinary religious leader who unified disparate Arab tribes under a powerful monotheistic vision. The traditional narrative of Islam's spread, that it swept across Arabia primarily through divine miracle, is challenged by the historical record. The early Islamic community achieved dominance through a complex combination of factors: military success, political acumen, strategic marriages and alliances, and a unifying religious message that resonated with existing monotheistic trends. Muhammad's genius lay in creating a movement that could transcend tribal divisions by placing all believers in direct relationship with one God, bound by shared ethical framework. This innovation proved extraordinarily effective in mobilizing Arab society for unprecedented expansion. Islamic tradition attributes various miracles to Muhammad: the splitting of the moon, multiplying food, healing the sick, the night journey, and most significantly, the miracle of the Quran itself. While these accounts are central to later Islamic piety, critical scholarship traces many to mythic and legendary antecedents. The famous story of Muhammad's night journey and ascension through the heavens has its roots in a genre of celestial journey literature, widespread across the ancient Near East. The Zoroastrian text Arda Varaf Nama describes a priest traveling through cosmic realms guided by an angel. Jewish mystical text Merkabah literature recounts similar heavenly ascents. Even the Christian apostle Paul writes of being caught up to the third heaven in 2 Corinthians 12:2. What distinguishes the Islamic version is its localization in Arabian context, with Muhammad traveling from Mecca to Jerusalem before ascending through the seven heavens, meeting earlier prophets and receiving instructions about prayer directly from God. This narrative emerged in elaborated form only in later hadith collections, not in the Quran itself, which makes only a brief, ambiguous reference in Quran 17:1. The story of Muhammad splitting the moon, based on Quran 54:1, parallels miracle accounts in other traditions. Jesus calms storms and feeds multitudes. Buddha performs various supernatural feats. Jewish prophets part seas and call fire down from heaven. Such nature miracles conform to established patterns of what religious audiences expected from divinely authorized figures. You see, long before the story of Muhammad splitting the moon, ancient cultures around the globe imagined dramatic lunar miracles involving damage, restoration, or divine intervention. Egyptian myths depicted Horus's eye, symbolically tied to the moon, as wounded, fragmented, and then miraculously healed, echoing the cycles of the moon. Hindu mythology spoke of Chandra Soma, whose curse and subsequent partial restoration by Shiva explained lunar phases through divine intervention. Chinese legends featured Hao Yi, whose celestial archery altered heavenly bodies, hinting at extraordinary lunar phenomena. Greeks romantically portrayed the goddess Selene's nightly miracles, emphasizing lunar transformations. Similarly, Mesopotamian culture saw the moon deity Sin involved in divine celestial omens. Even the Quran's self-proclaimed inimitability, the claim that its linguistic perfection proves divine authorship, has precedent in the ancient world's reverence for sacred texts. Greeks considered Homer divinely inspired. Jews saw Torah as God's perfect word. Various oracles and prophetic texts were believed to transcend human composition. The Quran's assertion of miraculous eloquence functioned within this established framework of textual reverence. What's striking is that the earliest layers of Islamic tradition contain relatively few miracle stories at all. The Quran itself repeatedly states that Muhammad performed no miracles except the Quran, with verses like, "They say, why are no signs sent down to him from his Lord? Say the signs are only with Allah, and I am only a clear warner." Quran 29:50. This suggests that miraculous tales proliferated later as the community sought to elevate their prophet to the supernatural status enjoyed by figures like Jesus in Christian tradition. Many miracle accounts entered the tradition during the period when Muslims were encountering Christians who boasted of Jesus' supernatural deeds. The impulse to show Muhammad as equally blessed with divine power likely motivated the collection and amplification of these stories in the 8th and 9th centuries, long after the events they purport to describe. The transformation from Muhammad's initial believers' movement to a distinct religious identity called Islam occurred gradually over the 1st century. After his death, material evidence, coins, inscriptions, architecture, reveals this evolution in striking detail. As we mentioned earlier, coins minted by the early caliphate, initially imitating Byzantine and Persian designs, sometimes even depicting Christian crosses or Zoroastrian fire altars, only gradually did these give way to distinctive Islamic symbolism, with Arabic inscriptions replacing imperial imagery. Under Abd al-Malik in 685 to 705 CE, a systematic program replaced figural representation with Quranic verses, a visible assertion of Islamic identity in opposition to Christian Byzantium. Back to the Dome of the Rock in Jerusalem, which was completed in 691, that provides the earliest monumental expression of emerging Islamic theology. Its inscriptions, the first known instances of an Islamic shahada, explicitly deny Trinity in Christ's divinity. God is one, God is eternal. He does not beget, nor is he begotten. This architectural statement, placed deliberately over Jerusalem's Temple Mount and facing Christian churches, announced Islam's theological position between the older monotheistic faiths. Early non-Muslim sources reveal that the conquerors initially called themselves Hagarenes or Hagarenes, descendants of Hagar, or Ishmaelites, rather than Muslims. Only gradually did that term Muslim, one who submits, become the community's primary self-designation, suggesting that distinct Islamic identity crystallized during the Umayyad period, 661 to 750 CE, rather than emerging fully formed at Muhammad's death. This gradual emergence carries an important implication. Many elements we now consider essentially Islamic developed through the interaction of Arab conquerors with the conquered populations of the Near East. As Arabs ruled over Christians, Jews, Zoroastrians, and others, they absorbed administrative techniques, architectural styles, philosophical concepts, and cultural practices, synthesizing these within an Islamic framework. Nowhere is this clearer than in the development of the Islamic law, Sharia. While later traditions hold that Islamic law derives directly from the Quran and Muhammad's example, historical evidence suggests a more complex process. Early Islamic legal concepts incorporated elements of Roman Byzantine law, Persian administrative practices, and local customs across the empire. Scholars with backgrounds in Jewish or Zoroastrian jurisprudence helped formulate Islamic legal principles, creating a synthesis that preserved the spirit of Quranic ethics while borrowing practical mechanisms from established systems. Similarly, the compilation of hadith, traditions about Muhammad's words and deeds, accelerated a century after his death. The vast collections we know today, like those of Bukhari and Muslim, took shape in the 9th century, reflecting not just preserved memories, but the theological debates and social concerns of that later era. What emerges from this evidence is not a diminishment of Islam's significance, but a more nuanced understanding of its development as a world religion. Like Christianity before it, Islam began as a movement within an existing religious tradition, before gradually defining its own distinct identity. The genius of early Islam lay in its ability to synthesize elements from surrounding cultures while maintaining its core commitment to strict monotheism and its ethical living. The story of Islam's origins, as revealed by modern scholarship, is far more fun and complex, even humanly compelling, than either the traditional narrative or simplistic Western caricatures suggest. It is the story of a remarkable religious movement born in a time of apocalyptic expectation, shaped by engagement with Jewish, Christian, and Persian traditions, and ultimately forging a distinct identity that would transform the world's history. Muhammad emerges from this historical reconstruction not as a one-dimensional prophet figure, but as an extraordinary religious innovator who unified Arab tribes under a powerful monotheistic vision. His success came not in isolation, but in competition with other prophetic movements, a contest his community ultimately won through a combination of compelling message and political achievement. The Quran, rather than appearing as a text without context, reveals itself as a deeply engaged with the religious ideas of late antiquity. Its stories and teachings draw upon biblical narratives, Jewish midrash, Christian apocrypha, and Arabian lore, reshaping these materials to articulate a strictly monotheistic worldview. The early Islamic community itself evolved from what historian Fred Donner said he calls believers' movement, initially inclusive of righteous Jews and Christians, into a distinct religious confession with clear boundaries. This transformation reflects not divine planning, but human adaptation to the challenges of building a new civilization across vastly different cultures. Well, some people might say none of these historical insights necessarily contradict the core of Islamic faith. Religious truth and historical development operate on different planes. Just as devout Christians can acknowledge the human aspects of their tradition's formation while maintaining belief in divine guidance, Muslims can appreciate the rich historical context of their faith while affirming its spiritual significance. What modern scholarship offers isn't necessarily a debunking, but an enrichment, a deeper appreciation for how a religious movement born in the 7th century Arabia could build upon existing traditions while creating something genuinely new. Islam's ability to synthesize diverse elements into a coherent whole helps explain its remarkable spread and continuing vitality. The story of Islam's origins reminds us that religious traditions are not static monoliths, but living streams that develop through human creativity, cultural exchange, and adaptation to changing circumstances. Understanding these processes need not diminish faith, but can deepen our understanding or our appreciation for complex ways in which the divine and human intersect in religious history. Far from being alien or inexplicable, Islam emerges from this historical investigation as a natural development within the religious evolution of the Near East, the last great flowering of the Abrahamic tradition that continues to shape our world today.